Welcome to this session on a most interesting piece of work and a rather unusual one. A play on a very significant period of Indian history, written in English, translated into Urdu and even Lithuanian, and having successfully completed more than 100 performances in Urdu alone. I call it unusual because it has been written by someone who is not, for the lack of better expression, in the business of literary writing, much less the business of writing plays. So, ladies and gentlemen, we are delighted to have with us today India's celebrated lawyer, parliamentarian, former minister and author Salman Khurshid, talking about his play Sons of Babur. Thank you very much, sir. Most welcome, and thank you for taking the time out for us today.
Thank you.
So let me start with saying this. It is very hard to believe that this is your debut as a playwright. And I mean, what you have produced is not just an eclectic play, but also something that results in a rethinking of colonial historiography, so to say, which also firmly establishes you not just as a playwright, but also as a writer who has written as a credible popular historian. As I said, people have known you as a lawyer, as a minister, as a politician, as an author on subjects of law, etc., and politics. In India, at least, we do not see lawyers producing good literature. So please tell us, or politicians producing good literature, please tell us what were the impulses that led to this, I won't call it transformation, but this addition of another feather in your cap.
Well, I think there's a little bit of personal history and a little bit of professional experience and background. I was interested in theatre as a student. I did theatre up to college, and then sadly had to give it up because of so many other things that one had to do, including politics, which is a different kind of theatre entirely.
And law.
And of course law has its own theatrics, etc. The personal thing about this was really my personal response and attempt to understand who I was in a plural country, in India. And when I began writing this, perhaps things were very different from what they might be thought to be today in India. But there were elements even then that would grow into the India that we see today. And I wanted to do something in terms of how do I respond in person, how do I respond to this? Should I sit down and write a book? That takes a long time. That takes a huge amount of research. And you never know when it can be done. So I thought, well, why don't we just make it into a play? It'll be quicker to write because there is not so much writing. But of course, at the end of the day, that turned out not to be true, because you may write fewer words, but each word requires to have so much meaning when you're doing theatre. So, but nevertheless, I chose the genre and started work on it. The very idea that permeates this play is an idea that is part of my public life, my politics, my philosophy of life, my understanding of what I am and where I am. And I think so that's in that sense it became relatively simple to proceed with what I wanted to say. Now there was of course a great deal of research to be done. There was a lot of books were coming out in 1857, so I had a great deal of literature available, and that all fell into place, all came together, and so we have this book.
Well, I must say you took a rather big risk in writing a play as a debut literary author. Why not a novel?
Yeah, frankly, there have been many false starts as far as novel is concerned. Normally, a play should be tougher than writing a novel. But a good novel itself is very difficult. I just somehow felt, maybe because of the time that I'd spent in theatre, I felt that I would get it right. And, I mean, people who are experts in theatre writing, etc., I felt might question many things about it in terms of format, in terms of moving from time and space and so on. So I was very self-conscious that what I end up with shouldn't seem amateur, shouldn't seem silly and ridiculous. So I wrote it carefully. I went back to my experience as much as I could, and in the end it sort of turned out I thought it turned out pretty good.
It did, it totally did. And there's a very interesting subtitle of the play, A Play in Search of India. So what kind of India were you searching for?
Well, as I said, the country we live in and the number of impressions that people have about that country. Now, many of us thought there was one dominant idea of India, which we kept describing as the idea of India, the values that we cherish, what we associated with the national movement, that we saw all around us. We saw it in our lives, we saw it at school and college, we saw it in our homes, we saw it amongst our friends, etc. Unfortunately, that is today under challenge. So the dominant idea is being challenged by people who say that this was an encroachment upon the real idea, and this was an attempt to overwhelm the real idea, and the real ideas emerged. And there are people who are talking about 2014 is the moment of India's independence, right?
Yes.
Now, fortunately, if something like this had happened before I wrote this play, I may not have written the play at all.
I was going to ask you that question. Or would you write it differently today?
I think I would have to do a different kind of play. It cannot be just a comfortable historical experience that this play is. It would have to be much more like Brecht. It will have to be much more like modern kind of plays. In fact, post-American, modern American theatre, it would be something different. And I tell you, I've had an idea, and I say this without any fear that this might get picked up by somebody else. I wanted to do another play, which I've sort of tried and failed, but I'll try again. I wanted to do a play about former students of Oxford University gathering in New Delhi. And these are the old Marxists and the conservatives and the liberals, etc., coming together 50 years or 25 years or 30 years after they've returned from Oxford. And then I thought, this is not interesting enough. Put them together with some other people. And so I thought, the only way you can really make it riveting is to have a group of Oxonians meeting in Delhi along with a group of Allegorians and an exchange between the Oxonians and the Allegorians 30 years after they left their respective universities. But I never got that done. But what I did do, and my friend Athar Farooqi helped me in that, was that I had written a little piece on my friends in Oxford, who many of whom were Marxists at that time. I'd written a little note on that, and we converted that into play. And Athar Farooqi was very helpful in that. We converted in that play into a play called Marksman at Oxford, right? And that's about people from Oxford who's gone into administration and who've gone into modern scholarship in India and who've become politicians in India, etc. And that's sort of done pretty well as well.
Yes. Let me just bring you back to this question of the idea of India. And if you permit me to just read a portion from your play. So here, this is Dhuranshu Mitra saying, "The very idea I have pursued for long, my lord, the idea I came in search of, the idea must now return home." And Bahadur Shah Zafar smiles and says, "You do mean India, right?" And he says, "No, I'm sorry, my lord. I'm just as happy with Hindustan, because ultimately labels and names do not matter, not beyond a point. It's the feeling inside that's important. Hindustan for Hindustanis, India for Indians, Bharat for Bharatvasis." And then Bahadur Shah Zafar gives a very interesting answer. My question, sir, is, do you think India as we can perceive it today, the modern India under the constitution, was born from the loss of Hindustan?
Gosh, yes, I think that's a difficult question to answer. The constitution came after India, or the Hindustan that we talk of, was truncated, was bifurcated, in fact, with the passage of time, trifurcated into Pakistan, India, Bangladesh. So it didn't remain Hindustan, obviously. But I think what we did very sensibly at that time, and the constitution in sort of reflects that, was to keep as much of Hindustan alive as we could, despite very significant parts of Hindustan having been taken away. To keep it as much alive as possible as a living experience. And that's what the Constitution has done. But of course, yes, the Constitution, as you know so well, has placed important embargoes and have given important guarantees to people who would think they are impacted and affected more extensively by partition. And that there is a constitutional assurance that it will still be the same, it will remain the same, despite the physical trifurcation, etc. And I think to that extent Hindustan lives, but we all change with time, we all modify our thinking, etc. And therefore it is more extensively Bharat, it is more extensively Bharatiya,
Yes.
and of course there are some poor people who just hang on to India because that's what they've known best.
Yeah. So let me ask you a question which stands at the intersection of law, politics, history, and your work. And I think your work itself actually stands at the intersection of all these, and literature. India today positions itself as a democratic republic, guaranteeing, say, free speech and other freedoms to its people. Whereas in practice, our people, especially our writers and poets, artists, are fettered in multiple ways. On the other hand, even at the height of the so-called allegedly authoritarian Mughal rule, the plenitude of literature that has been produced suggests that it was very critical of the establishment, and while applicable laws may have been illiberal, practice was very free and democratic. So I want to ask you, sir, in your opinion, do you think that a professedly secular democracy is giving its writers, its artists, a lesser license to disagree than ostensibly authoritarian monarchies of the past?
Well, yes. I mean, I think on a certain level, the establishment, the administrative establishment, is becoming very, very touchy and very finicky about questioning of authority, of questioning of ideas of authority. Forget about authority, but questioning the ideas of authority is becoming very finicky. And the Supreme Court has, as you know, in several judgments expressed its deep concern, as has the Delhi High Court, Allahabad High Court and Bombay High Court, etc. But despite their expressing their deep concerns and reaching out to people to hold their hands, it continues and nothing seems to stop it. But that's to the extent of people in authority. But ordinary people like you and me, we seem to have got a very contorted view of free thought and freedom. Essentially, the bottom line is, of course you're free to say what I believe is correct. There is no problem. But who said that you're free to say something that I disagree with? Because if I disagree, it means I will feel hurt.
Yeah.
And if I feel hurt, the law says you will be punished. Now, just reducing law to such a farce
Yes.
is a general view that is gaining ground. And retorting and reacting and holding people responsible without the slightest bit of investigation on your part as a person, as a human being, before you say, well, this is what you said and that I disagree with. They just take whatever comes on the media to be the last word. This is it. You must have said it if it's on the media. You must have said it. And then to be told, well, if you haven't said it, why don't you go and deny it? So you go from channel to channel denying it and tying yourself up into knots, etc. So as a society, there's a problem. I mean, there's a dichotomy, if you like, in our country, that you have the Supreme Court of the land giving differently sexually inclined persons equal rights and dignity and respect and participation in society. To one extent, you go as far as that, and society as a whole is saying, no, you have no right to be different. We need uniformity, right? So everything should be uniform. It must look the same. That's a phase that we are going through, and that's a phase that is a worrisome phase.
And as against the very syncretic and pluralist nature of society, during the time that you talk about in your play.
Absolutely.
So do you think that as a society we are regressing backwards?
We have, and who's to blame for it? Who's to blame for it? Democracy, sadly,
yes.
Because if it wasn't democracy, whoever was in control could be told that you're doing something completely and utterly wrong, and you should be replaced, and Democrats must be brought in your place. But if democracy begins to do this, and democracy begins to go wrong, then democracy has to be told that you're wrong. And what's happening today, to the extent possible, today the Supreme Court is saying to democracy, you're going wrong, and we've got to get you back to the right path. Now, how much can the poor Supreme Court do, and how long will it want to continue doing it is the big question.
Yes.
But that's for another day.
Yes, and Mr. Jekyll and Hyde Court. So let me bring you back to the semantics of your play. The device that you have used is very, very fascinating. We have this Bengali student talking in conversation with Bahadur Shah Zafar in Rangoon, an infirm Bahadur Shah Zafar incarcerated there. And throughout the 5 acts of your play, the narrative through this conversation shifts very, very smoothly, very seamlessly between not only different periods of time, but also between fact and fiction. So tell us something about the device that you have used. Why did you choose this device? A Bengali student speaking to Zafar.
This is interesting, but I mean, let me be honest. There wasn't deep thought about who this student should be. Rudranshu Mukherjee is a dear friend from Oxford days. And he was always pontificating, and he was always giving the little speeches on history, etc. So I thought, gosh, he's the man, he's the one who has to be this young boy. And that's how it became Rudra, that's how it became a Bengali boy, etc. And of course, it was in some of the performances that Tom Alter gave it a greater polish about interface with a Bengali young Bengali boy. But the idea came from there, and the very thought of to actually go through the entire period of Mughal history and not be caught in a narrative that becomes boring, and that is just a scene after scene of this is what happened next and this is what happened next, and no interplay, no contrasts, and so on and so forth. I said, how do we do it? And there I thought Rudra is the person who would provide the link, take us through in a manner that is difficult to explain. He's not in a classroom, he's not in a study, but there are things that he imagines when he goes to sleep. He's so full of these ideas about the play within the play. He's writing a play.
Yes.
So the play within a play, he's so full of those ideas that he goes to sleep, and those ideas emerge, and those are placed on stage. And in some places, it's just something that he's living through, which is when he actually visits Bahadur Shah Zafar. He's actually physically there, almost transcending time. And he forgets at times that he's transcending time, but Bahadur Shah continues to remind him that he's transcending time, and they come from two different worlds entirely, both in terms of time, space, and culture. and that allowed, I think, that allows for greater interest to be focused on the play.
I'm glad, sir, you mentioned time, space, and culture, because this time that you talk about, the period that you talk about, especially Zafar's Delhi, was a very interesting period of paradoxes, because on the one hand the Mughal Empire was in spectacular decline, and on the other Urdu was flourishing as a language of poetry especially, and Bahadur Shah Zafar himself typified the Urdu of Delhi, and he was a great poet. Now, how difficult was it for you, difficult or otherwise, to create an English-speaking Bahadur Shah Zafar?
Yes, I mean it's important. It's important, but I must admit to not having the same fluency in writing in Urdu. Let's be honest, and therefore, having been more comfortable with English, I wrote in English. My friend Athar Farooqi then translated it beautifully into Urdu. However, I thought that English was important because we had to make this into something which was different from realism. This was not actually a narrative about what was happening in the Mughal period. This was a narrative about what had happened. It was a narrative about what we can imagine had happened and how it would have gone. So it was important that they didn't speak Urdu. Right? Because
Yes.
we had to remove it from reality. We had to remove it sufficiently from reality, and therefore English came very handy. So it was making a virtue of a necessity. English came very handy. But of course, you're right, it's very tough. Bahadur Shah Zafar, who's associated with the court and with Urdu that was nourished by his court and that was preserved in his court. And we've seen some beautiful plays about the court of Bahadur Shah Zafar and the poetry that was engaged his attention. But as we went along, I found that there was a special thing that you could do in Urdu, in English, that I may not have been able to do in Urdu. And then it reached larger audiences. So many people may not have understood Urdu because they're not familiar with it to that extent. And English would reach out to a larger number of people. So it worked. In the end, it worked very effectively.
Yes. No, and so that's since you said it was not meant to be close to realism. So is Athar Farooqi's translation in Urdu closer to realism? Is it realistic?
Yeah. I think that when you sit through Athar Farooqi's translation, it looks more like you're going through a real Mughal world. It's much more like that, as far as I can see it. When you see it through when you sit through an English version, it's like it's a play and you're enjoying a play. But with Athar Farooqi's translation, you almost get into the real Mughal world, as it were. So there's a charm of that as well, and there is, some people would prefer that. And there is, of course, charm of doing it in English, and if nothing, keeping English alive.
How did the Lithuanian translation come?
Well, it happened because there was this young ambassador who was very keen. I went to an evening with him and called some ambassadors just for a play reading, etc. And he thought it might be great if we went to his country. A beautiful country, I'm sure that you know how wonderful it is. And he thought that the best thing would be that we go and release it in Lithuanian language. So he had it translated, and he had a wonderful event there in one of the big malls, which has a huge floor full of books, etc. And he had a play reading there. We sat down and did the play reading, of course, in English. We did a play reading. A lot of interesting people came. So that's how it happened in Lithuanian.
So I will ask you my last question, and then we could perhaps read some parts of the play.
Sure, absolutely.
This play was written in English, as you just explained, and not just that. English rulers were actually very important players in the Mughal playing field. And imperialism casts long shadows, and our ideas of modernity are often clouded in ignorance of historical evidence. And I think your play does some of the corrective work that needs to be done. Don't you think it should be staged in England?
Yeah. I think it should be. I think it should be staged in England. I think I've been more gentle on the British than
Yes.
my friend Shashi Tharoor often is on them. And if they can appreciate in their modern times, if the British can appreciate what Shashi Tharoor has to say about what they did to us, frankly, I'm sure they'd be quite happy to
Do this.
quite happy to watch this play as well.
We are looking forward to your staging this in England. And my last question, sir, do you think the idea of India as it stands today is here to stay?
Well, I have a personal faith that it will survive. It must survive because the consequences of its not surviving are horrendous. One can't think of them. And it will survive, frankly. It's a very, it's a strange thing to say, but it'll survive not because people will fight back for it. Those who still believe in it and who are still around, seemingly in reducing numbers. But it'll happen because those who have been assumed to have been recruited on the other side will get fed up. Will get fed up. The idea of India will emerge from the dominant idea that is being imposed upon us today. It will emerge from that because one day when the enemy ceases to be, there will be very little to unite the forces there, and I hope that happens. I hope it happens in our lifetime, and if it does, be scope for another play.
So when are you writing your next plays?
When do I? Well, let me see. I mean, my writings on law themselves are getting me into a lot of trouble. But the theme is still the same. I want peace. I want reconciliation. I want dignity for all. I want friendship. But the insistence that if you want friendship, you must give up your identity, and we can be friends. It reminds me of that scene in Passage to India, where Aziz and Fielding, after all the incidents that have happened, that have divided people in Chandrapur or wherever it was, are riding on two horses, and as they ride, Fielding says to Aziz, "Why can't we be friends again?" And before Aziz can answer, a big rock comes in between them, and the horses part. And when they join together again, Aziz says, "You British, we will first throw you out of this country, and then we'll be friends." So sometimes things have to change dramatically as a natural consequence of what is happening. And then you can be back together.
I hope
friends.
we are back together, and thank you very much, sir, for giving us time this evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Now we can do
Yeah, please.
So this is scene 2, and I will read Rudranshu Mitra, and Mr. Khurshid will read Bahadur Shah Zafar. The setting is this: in a small rundown dwelling in Rangoon with a veranda and a raised courtyard in front, an old and infirm-looking Bahadur Shah Zafar is half reclining on a cot propped up by bolsters. The place is surrounded by greenery. And now Rudranshu enters and calls out, "Hi, hello, is someone there? Hello? Oh dear, where am I? Can someone hear me? Hello?
Who is it who disturbs our peace? Physician? Soldier? Guard?
Yes, I do. I mean, it's,
Who? Come here. We cannot see you. What impudence, young man. Are we here so humble that even minions forget their manners? Go tell your wretched Firangi masters to let us sleep They've stolen everything we possessed and ruled. Must they now take away our sleep as well? Is that the law of their land? Was our life spared only for endless torture and torment?
But, sir, King, Bacha, please, is it really you? The great Bahadur Shah Zafar? My salutations. I found you then, at last.
Stop. Enough. Is that you, Douglas? Or is it Metcalfe? What do you want now? A knighthood for our stolen empire? Go, your king will bestow it upon you. Take what you want, but please spare us our misery. Have we not been punished enough?
You mistake me for someone else, King of Hindustan. Oh dear, I'm sorry. I don't even know how to address you. Sir, I'm not Douglas or Metcalfe. I'm not even a British subject.
Oh, yes. Even we are said to be a British subject. They even put this poor old man on trial for sedition. We would not betray our motherland, so we were punished. It is hell itself.
I know.
What do you know? What does anybody know? You know nothing. Nothing at all. They stripped and killed our sons. Nay, royal princes, Mughal princes of great Timur's lineage in cold blood. Emperor Babur's descendants mercilessly slaughtered Mirza Mughal, Khilji Sultan, even our grandson Abu Bakr. They brought their severed heads to us, to their father.
Please, Your Majesty, Exalted Highness, oh dear.
Khuda, another British spy. What secrets are we left with now that you seek? We wait for the final moment of truth. Our modesty is no secret. The Firangis bring strange people to gape at us and at our Begum too. Please go. Go and leave us alone to cry in pain, to die, to rot. The pain! Our empire snatched and defiled by Gora's pale-faced impostors. Now what more do you want?
My lord, I'm not your enemy.
What? What then is your business? Why do you disturb our privacy? Speak or depart, young man.
I'm sorry. I'm not even sure what I'm doing here. How should I address you?
Haven't they taught you court etiquette, young man? If you really do not know why you are here, then you must leave. That will be all.
Your Exalted Highness, please let me explain. I am not really a part of your world. I mean...
They all say that now. Hakim Esam too, and what did we not do for him? We gave him the court of Timur on a platter. We made the emperor's conscience, but he was no different when he came to giving evidence. How many of our retinue excused themselves from the journey to Rangoon? Now you taunt us with another betrayal? We are used to being let down, but be so kind as to tell us, what is your world? Who are you?
I fear time will run out, my lord. Please allow me to say something before I have to leave.
What time? Time does not move here, so why do you speak of it running? It stands still. Look around. It is stopped like the arms of a broken clock. If you care about time, you need to go elsewhere. Oh, we are so tired. Why should our dignity not be returned? The family jewels too. The Begum frets endlessly. Time has taken them all away.
Your Exalted Highness, I am hoping to take you back home, where time once again be your own, amongst your own people. How can you think that we have forsaken you? We need you. You must return to where you belong, your land.
Not another mutineer from Meerut fighting for Deen in a world devoid of faith. Haven't they rounded you all up for public hanging? please, you've all caused us enough trouble already. But for your silly notions, Mirza Jawan Bakht could have ruled Hindustan. Who knows, things could have turned out different. But wait, what tidings have you brought? You say you've come a very long way. Rangoon is much further from Delhi than Meerut, isn't it? Who knows? Delhi Duras. Come, tell us. You know Delhi? How is our Delhi? Butchered and battered?
Delhi lives, Your Majesty. We have rid ourselves of the British yoke more than half a century ago. We can now undo the wrongs of history. Well, I mean, we can at least take you home with honor to express our gratitude.
So, Mirza Ghalib laments no more. Our Delhi is no longer desolate. The river Jamuna runs blue again. Have Muslims been allowed to return to their homes? Is the Jama Masjid safe? And what's left of the Qila Mualla? We don't understand. If the British are gone, why have our courtiers not come to escort us back to the throne? Why should we send a stranger? We believe we have never seen you before. You speak of half a century, but we've suffered much longer.
I can explain everything. I just need to get my bearings right. Sorry if I sound a bit confused. I mean, about time.
Allah, this cough signals the end of the Mughal Empire. This place will be our death. You can tell us your tale only if we live to hear it. We need a Hakim and medicines. Oh, it is so damp and dark here, just like a grave. Allah, the light of the world itself in darkness.
You will have the best, exalted Majesty. I merely seek the privilege of your attention. I bring to you the voice of the Indian people, your people.
You mean our subjects? Surely subjects, not just people. And Hindustan, please.
As you please, Your Majesty. The point is that your dream has been realized. You did not raise the standard of freedom in vain. Oh, if only you could see it all. Come back, please.
How? Alone and just like this, dressed in an old kaftan? Okay, get me a horse. The emperor can still ride even at the age of 87. We are not here by choice. But there is no going back. No home left. Didn't Mirza Ghalib say that so many are slaughtered in Delhi that there are none left to mourn the ones who will die now? Do they still have a grave for us in Mehrauli? And will the Phool Walon Ki Sair, the flower sellers, visit our grave as well? Will they all come, Muslims and Hindus, to bid their Badshah goodbye?
No goodbye, my lord. It will be a welcome. And the scene ends.
Kafi hai?